And I want to kind of segue into another thing that we're concerned about. If I could take a moment to pull up a graph that we put together with Perk. You see this okay?
Yes, I see it perfectly.
Okay. So one of the things that we did here in California was Perk looked into what was the original projection regarding the hospital census and what they expected the surge to be, because the whole premise of the shutdown in California was based upon overwhelming the hospitals, that they could not handle the surge that was coming. So in I think it was April 1st, what we found in the transcripts and with the original with Newsom's interviews, and what do you call it when they're like the official reports and
Minutes, yeah.
yes, everything. So they said originally that without intervention, they projected that there could potentially be 700,000 hospital beds needed in California. And then from there, they went to, with intervention, Newsom projected that we would need about 123,000 hospital beds. And that's with them bringing in the Mercy ship. That's with them having access to fairgrounds. And I mean, everything, they had it all set up to go over the licensed amount of beds here by almost 50,000 to intervene, because there's going to be this huge surge. And what we found that actually happened was, at the peak, when it was supposed to be the peak in May, we found that there were less than 3,000 actual hospital beds being used during this time. So now that's just on a daily bed usage. So, well, and the consequences of that, as you can see here, they estimate that California hospitals potentially have lost $14 billion in revenue, and people are being laid off, workers are being furloughed, there's pay cuts happening with, for physicians and staff. The ICU beds and the ventilators were never at risk of reaching capacity. So this is actually a really big deal for two reasons that I wanted to discuss with you. The first one, and let me come back to you here. The first one is, how could they have gotten this huge overprojection so wrong? Let's start with that. Why did they get this so wrong? Because the
that's easy.
Is huge. It's impacting every aspect of Californians' lives. So how did they get that wrong? Let's start with that.
Well, it's a model prediction made by my modelers, who, these professionals who make predictions, their work is going to be seen, and they're going to be talked about more, and they will have more influence in society and in their profession if their prediction is outrageously different. If everyone says, "Oh my God, look at what's coming, we have to do something," well, then your work has had some influence. So there's a professional reason that people would be happy to do this, but also these same modelers may have conflicts of interests. They may be they may be attendants or invitees at conferences that are funded by big pharma, etc. There's a whole network of potential conflict of interest with medical researchers and academics and so on. That's just the way the world is. But these model predictions were complete garbage, because it was based on very preliminary data of only some very sick people in hospital in China. And on that basis, on the basis of these first observations, which everybody knows can be very incorrect and are very biased by their very nature, because you're only studying the people that are the sickest that came to you because their life is in danger. You're basing everything on the few measurements and observations that you make of those very sick people. Then your estimates of the relevant parameters, such as how quickly this is spreading and how contagious it is and so on, without getting into the technical names of the model parameters, can be way off.
Right.
So as a scientist, you should never make these kinds of predictions without at the same time insisting on what the potential errors in your predictions are.
Okay.
And there was not enough proper error analysis and communication of what the potential error was in making those predictions, because if they had, the error bars would have been huge and we wouldn't have been very concerned. We would have said, well, let's wait and get better data. So
Right.
if they had reported the first and most influential prediction studies, which were never peer reviewed, which were just a white paper for the government, basically, if they had properly reported the errors and done a proper error calculation, then the response would have been, well, then we need better data before we go, fly off the handle. That wasn't done. So this leads us to the conclusion that some people wanted this pandemic to be a pandemic. Some people wanted the response that we got. And there was a globally coordinated response across all nations except a few. And the solutions that were being proposed were very, very similar everywhere, lockdown and distancing and so on.
Right.
All things that have never been demonstrated scientifically to work. There
Right.
is
Right.
no study that demonstrates this 6-foot rule, for example. That's just complete hogwash.
And the masks, where the
You
masks
have to extrapolate irrelevant scientific measurements to come up with 6 feet. You have to say, well, a droplet will fall within this distance. Yeah, but it's not about droplets. It's about fine aerosols that are part of the fluid air. That's how it's transmitted. This is demonstrated.
Wow.
So don't even tell us about droplets, because it's not a relevant transmission feature. Otherwise, it wouldn't be seasonal like it is, and so on. So it's just whatever they want to do and whatever they come up with, but there's no scientific basis to any of this.
Right, absolutely. And part of the problem here is this is the foundational projection. This is what the model that they're using is also how they're justifying all of their actions. So there's a couple of
until they can't justify it anymore. Once you point out that but the hospitals are half empty and they never filled up and we don't need hospital beds, then they'll come up with something else to continue these distancing measures.
Well,
okay?
I think this is actually
and they're very creative, and there'll always be more reasons. Like, okay, it's over now. All the experts are saying, we've developed herd immunity in most places. The curves are dying out. It's not an emergency anymore. And they'll say, oh, but it could flare up again if we don't continue the lockdown and if we don't continue distancing.
Right.
There's no evidence for that. This is just a gratuitous statement when you say things like that.
Right. Well, and back to the projection, I want to bring something up and ask and get your thought on this. So, mind you, I showed you that there isn't a surge. It never happened in California. Everything that they said would happen in astronomical numbers, it didn't happen. Like, we're talking 98% inaccurate. But here's what's interesting. Recently here in California, the governor's administration plans to move COVID-19 patients that have minimal symptoms into isolated areas of assisted living. So there are a lot of Californians that are in an uproar, including medical professionals. And if you could maybe share a couple of thoughts of why problematic.
To me, this is
right.
We're getting into a complete dystopia here. This is
right. Why would we put patients into a place where the targeted risk group actually is living there, right? I mean, would you agree? Is this problematic?
It's what identifying people who are infected and wanting to separate them from their family or putting them in isolation is obscene.
Right.
Okay? People get infected and develop immunity. This is how it is. This is how it's always been. There's no better system than that. And to start interfering with families, with social groups, with social contacts in this very direct way that's run by the state as though it were a totalitarian state. Mm-hmm. And it's not science-based, and it's just pure abusive power to come in and destroy human relationships, and so that you become just this entity that we can inject vaccines into,
right,
and get money from the government to pay for those vaccines, and make billions of dollars, and that's all that you are, and we're going to treat you like this biological unit that we can separate from a social context and so on. It's obscene. And the thing about California that really shocked me as I looked at the data in preparation for our talk
Yes.
is that there's already a large amount of poverty in California.
Right.
35% of people are in poverty.
Right.
What is it? 40% of people roughly have high school education or less.
Yeah.
There's 4 million small businesses in California.
Mm-hmm.
You know, people rely on their small businesses, on their ability to work, to have a good life and to be who they are. Even their identity, their integrity depends on it, and you destroy that for a lot of people. I
Oh,
mean, the
absolutely.
immeasurable. Okay, you still with me? Oh, there was an
Oh,
interruption in
I
the
lost you for just a second. Would you say that last part again about what was immeasurable?
the damage to society from these lockdowns
Oh,
and
right.
from the complete stalling of the economy
Right.
and throwing away all the jobs that we don't care about, that we say are not essential.
Right.
um, the, the impact on the person,
Yeah.
whether it's a single parent, a single mother, or young people trying to make their lives and so on, the impact is much greater on the lower classes in society, the lower economic classes, than the other classes. I mean, if you're a professional and you're working from home and you're spending more time away from the office and with your family, you're just happy to do this. So they're getting complete compliance from the people who are happy to tweet about how much fun this all is. They're
Right.
getting complete compliance from the upper middle class people and professional classes, but they're causing incredible harm to the economically underprivileged classes.
You're absolutely right. And